Some may say the coolest.
Some may say the coolest. But I'm going to pass it off to Jacob and let him take it away, the real brain behind all this. So here you go, man.
Yeah, I don't know about the brain. I'm more so the test dummy in our operation. So work with a lot of great, very smart developers, engineers, people like Brian that help make me look good. But at the end of the day, what I'm good at doing is talking about the great work the rest of our team does, and then go out and put it to the test out in the field. But long story short, what we're working towards as our big kind of grandiose vision for the company is to make the world more accessible, or as I have up on the screen, make the most up-to-date virtual interactive representation of the world. So thinking about when I wanted to start iVue, going back to studying unmanned aircraft systems at Middle Tennessee State University, I had this idea to map the world with drones. And I started thinking about how you could actually build a business around this idea. And first of all, I thought, well, we need to make our own drones. And beyond just capable of doing mapping missions, drones are, of course, also capable of plenty of other missions, like deliveries, for example. And so what I'm trying to get at is a drone doesn't have to be doing a mapping mission to be able to collect data that can be fed back into the world map, kind of like a Tesla autopilot sort of system. So that brings up the second part of the equation, which is actually creating the Google Maps sort of interface, or the world map that all of our drones can be operated from, and then that same map can be updated to be more up-to-date, more interactive. And then the last part of it, which is where we actually started, not being a developer or engineer myself, Brian and I started iVue as a media production business where most people still today operating a drone are doing some sort of photo or video work with it to make money, even within the GIS mapping industry. So going into where we got started, I'll kind of gloss over this just because this isn't quite as interesting, I think, for a lot of people here. Brian and I basically started off, like I mentioned, as a media production service company, quickly realized that we couldn't grow and scale the business if we're the ones going out to every job site. And so where I'm not the greatest drone operator, not the greatest photographer, videographer, I started replacing myself with freelance drone operators, photographers, and videographers. So kind of building like an Uber sort of marketplace. Instead of connecting drivers to riders, connecting freelance content creators to our customers, predominantly within real estate, construction, businesses that host events, but it's kind of gone all across the spectrum. Whenever there's a need for photo or video sort of media, we're able to help out, even if it doesn't require a drone. And then so that was started back in 2017, where I dropped out of Middle Tennessee State. Fast forward a couple years later, I had met this guy at a local makerspace here, and he was very interested in our ambitions to get into making our own drone hardware. And so I kind of took under his wing, so to speak. He was like the Leonardo da Vinci, or is the Leonardo da Vinci of robotics, kind of master of all engineering elements, if you will. And we ran the makerspace up until he couldn't afford to pay for it out of pocket anymore. And then we actually started Coming Robotics Club together. And instead of being like every week, 2-3 times a week, we could only afford to meet really every couple of weeks. And it's just a lot harder to keep people coming to those sort of meetings, right, with that sort of frequency. And we were the only ones there at that last meeting. This was March of 2019, and I asked him if he wanted to help start the robotics division of iVue, which is iVue Robotics. A couple days later, we met at the local Barnes & Noble little coffee shop, started designing our first consumer drone product, or prosumer drone product. And actually, here we are in 2026, we do not have that prosumer drone product to market. Fast forward a little bit from 2019 to 2021, we realized we were never going to get that prosumer drone product out to market that we are working on if we couldn't actually start selling our own internal development platform to validate these ideas that we have for the prosumer drone market that really no one else is going after right now. And so to kind of frame that up, most people think about drones right now as flying cameras. They take photos and videos, but if you're not a photographer, you're not a videographer, you're not in GIS, you really don't have a need for a drone as far as where it can provide utility for you. Of course, on the flip side, there's the military, right, where you put warheads on foreheads, so to speak, with drones. And that's also not very utilitarian to a lot of people. But there's a lot of gray area for where drones are already being used today, just require custom drones and complex software, kind of like Q ground control was mentioned. Our first handful, or really first couple of dozen of develop air units that we got out to customers required them to use this Q ground control software, which if you guys are familiar with personal computers and like the evolution of the personal computer industry, I like to make a lot of analogies to where we're at, to how the personal computer industry started and now has developed, where if you were to ask everyone that uses a personal computer today to stop using Windows, stop using Mac OS, and require them to use Linux, a lot less people would be using a personal computer, and that's where we stand in the drone industry today. So beyond actually making our drone hardware that, again, we started developing back in 2019, we brought our first one to market back in 2021. Actually, a professor at Kennesaw State University in the computer engineering department had research sponsored by T-Mobile, where he created basically a 6G router. So he got special clearance from the FCC to be able to set up a network, a long distance network between boats, cars, or RC boats, RC cars, and now drones. And so his only other option other than building his own drone from scratch was to buy like an off-the-shelf DJI Phantom drone at the time, duct tape his payload to it along with another battery, and that's just not very practical, as opposed to just being able to take his payload, mount it onto the rail system that we have standard underneath our drones, and then just provide power and data connectivity through the ports that we actually have some standardized, but being a development platform, you can actually take out any of these side plates and not just add connectors to provide data and power connectivity, but you can also add sensors like an FPV camera as well, or we've even worked with students that have created a weather monitoring system for Develop Air. So basically turning Develop Air into a mobile weather station just by attaching a weather monitor to the weather sensor to the front, and then attaching a Raspberry Pi or like another computer to the bottom to actually record and save all that data on board. But nonetheless, we are still working towards getting to the prosumer drone market, but like the early days of the personal computer industry, people that were buying personal computers were really the developers wanting and willing to develop their own applications, wanting and willing to develop their own devices or peripherals to interact with the computer. And so we've had to do a lot of that learning the hard way where we're at, where for example, this Develop Air HP, our highest performance model, was sold with a thermal camera integration, and that's something that we don't really offer standard across the board and something that we have to customize to be able to deliver to the customer. And we found that while in some cases like this, it's worthwhile to get our foot in the door, you're really not our customer for Develop Air if you're not wanting and willing to do that integration yourself, that own payload development in some cases. And so while we're selling a lot of these Develop Air drones to colleges and high schools with STEM programs, our two most recent customers were actually our first two customers that had found us just from our web presence. We post our test flight videos online, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so they, one, could see that we have a very real platform and that there's really no better proof in the pudding, so to speak, if we're using this our own platform to develop our own payloads and to verify our own software applications work. And so I guess our second to most recent order was a company out of Huntsville, Alabama doing R&D contracting where they do a lot of just custom R&D projects for the government, and they need a drone platform that they could create different payloads or attach different payloads to, as well as when it's required, develop their own software applications. And beyond testing them out in simulation, which we do ourselves, there's oftentimes very real differences that you don't catch until you test it in the real world with a real drone. So they literally bought our development platform to be used as a development platform where oftentimes one example I'll show you is another one of our customers bought one of these Develop Air HP drones, and they started using it for disaster recovery sort of missions. And while it's definitely capable of being used for such purposes, it's no DJI as far as ease of use, right? And it was never designed to be. So all of that is what I'm getting at, is trying to say that we are not yet at the point that we have a drone for anyone and everyone, but this is a way that we can kind of validate what works, both from the component level, what was talked about from, I think, James's perspective, from the integration, where we're not just building the hardware itself, we're building not just the hardware itself, but we're building the software. And again, kind of use the personal computer industry as an analogy, where Dell computers started off building their computers to order. They would get an order, then build it, deliver it 8 to 12 weeks later. We're by and large operating with that same business strategy right now. As much as we would love to just scale up production, produce the same version of Develop Air, hundreds if not thousands of times over, we're also taking more of the product strategy that Apple had, where they're not just, again, building computers like they started off doing, open source with off-the-shelf components, building their own cases for them. They started developing their own software to make their computers differentiated and make them ultimately just easier to use. So beyond the hardware that I've talked about a little bit so far, this is a look at our drone operating system called World's iVue. So again, while we have used Q Ground Control and Mission Planner previously, actually still have to use those programs for the initial setup and configuration, or if you have to do a compass calibration. Unfortunately, we don't have a UI to support a compass calibration in our software yet. We are really just focused on what people really care about the most, which is operating their drone. And then of course, when you can't operate your drone due to a compass calibration, those are the next steps that we're working on. But a big part of making drones more accessible, more widespread, is not just making them easy to use, right? It's making them more valuable. So kind of glossed over this earlier, but most people, they think, I don't even want a drone. Why do I have a need for a drone? But I would say everyone in this room lives within an urban or suburban area within a couple of miles of a handful of grocery stores, gas stations, convenience stores. And to me, it makes a lot more sense like how the automotive industry developed, where at first when the Model T first started to become widespread, it was delivery businesses buying the Model T and then doing deliveries on behalf of the nearby retail businesses. And then over time, the retail businesses bought their own Model Ts and started doing their own deliveries directly to their customers. And then of course, how it is now, you can have your own car and just go pick up your goods whenever you want. And so I think that's not going to go away, right? There's still delivery services that people use, but I think what will make sense for most people is you actually have your own drone, or drones at your household that you send out to the local Amazon locker, fast food restaurant, retail store to do your own essentially curbside pickup, right? And that's just one of many applications for that same one drone to be able to do. So where we've talked a lot about drones being developed for specific purposes, we're taking, again, more of the general purpose approach that personal computers did, where, hey, this is one device, one platform that can not just be used for commercial purposes, but also for recreation. So thinking about having your drone or drones at your household, yes, it could be used for deliveries. It could be, that same drone could water your garden, fertilize your yard, do inspection or a scan around the neighborhood if your dog gets out of like the fenced-in area or your backyard, fenced-in backyard. And then if you have kids or siblings, that kind of like a computer can be used for games, play laser tag with your drone outside. Like we put on the world's largest claw machine game, attaching like a winched claw attachment to one of our Develop Air, invited out members of the public, people that have never flown a drone before. We're able to just use like an Xbox or a gaming controller to fly the drone, lower down the claw, pick up objects, fly it back to the landing zone, and if they picked it up and brought it back and landed, they got to keep the prize. And we kind of did that, one, just to show what was possible, but two, as a way to give back, we donated everything else to Toys for Tots, just to, again, show what drones could be used for outside of taking photos and videos. But diving a little bit deeper into our software, this is where I think we're really going to be able to stand out moving forward. especially with where we're at currently on the hardware side. But let me go ahead and just plug in one of our develop air drones here. Actually do this base model develop air. Now, we're not going to get GPS in here, but again, I'll be more than happy to do a flight demo for whoever is interested afterwards. And so one of the downsides of building our software as a web application right now is when you plug in a USB device, it just can't automatically connect like in Q ground control. So it's not quite as user-friendly there, but everywhere else, once you actually have your radio connected, it's much easier than Q ground control. And so now we're going to see if I zoom into my drone's position, it's at the 000 coordinate in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But kind of like Q ground control, beyond just being able to fly with a controller, either one that has like a built-in screen like this, you could also use a more dedicated like RC helicopter airplane sort of controller, but that's often off-putting to a lot of people just getting into operating drones, especially within the education space. Most students are more used to a controller like this. So of course, like really any drone that you can use Q ground control for, you can use a gaming controller to operate our develop air drones. But we've actually found the best form factor for drone operation, kind of like these smart controllers, is actually just a fully fledged handheld PC. So this is like a full Windows PC, just with removable controls on the side. So just think of like a Windows PC version of a Nintendo Switch. The one downside, or the biggest downside of these is also a point that James touched on. There's no radio integration, right? So you actually have to plug a USB radio into this computer, have it hanging off. Of course, with a cable like this, that would be absurd. You can use a shorter cable, but it's still just not as refined as something like DJI has to offer, where the radio is built in. But now, where DJI, as great as they have this vertical integrated solution, they don't really think about how drones are becoming a part of our everyday lives. And if you have one of these like smart controllers that are often $1,000 or more, it just becomes a paperweight whenever you're not flying your drone, versus if it were just a handheld computer and kind of with an operating system centered around a world of drones, right? Beyond having the drone control application. I touched on our media work that we started doing. So the other application that we have in development right now, and the preview version is not the best, but I can show you in the same way that you can like visualize your drone on the map, be able to upload photos and videos to the map as well. So this is a way that we're building out our operating system with other applications. So when you're not flying your drone, you're still able to make use out of our own handheld PC when we can bring that to market, or for the time being, just a software platform on any device with a web browser. But as far as the value this provides to not just our drone operators, we found a lot of people have problems just sharing photos and videos, even with Google Drive and like YouTube and Facebook, and especially when it's like drone specific media. You have like footage of the Atlanta skyline you want to share. It makes a lot more sense to just share it on that location on the map, via a pin. You select the pin, it opens up the window. You can view all the photos and videos, and then giving a way for drone operators to make money, more money now, actually allowing them to sell that content as stock footage as well. So you can choose to just upload the photos and videos to the map, make them freely available for everyone to view and share, or you can say, hey, you can preview these photos and videos, but if you actually want to download them and use them within your own content, you're buying it in the form of stock footage. So we do have other applications kind of on the roadmap, I would like to say, in development. But think about this, again, world map as an operating system, where having like a chat or talking, messaging, communication application as well. So just like you would for your phone, but built into your handheld PC that you're using for drone operations. Now you're not just seeing your drone on the map, you're not just uploading your content, managing all your content on the map. Your whole contacts list, would show up with like pins on the map. And like my case being Jacob Andrews, you would see a little circle on the map with a JA. You click that little circle and it opens up a window where then you could text me, voice chat me, video chat me. So I think where we're going, as much as people like to think like the smartphone is the end-all be-all sort of consumer device that we're all going to be carrying around, I think we're still at the very early days of the handheld PC market. And I think as especially we continue our development, we're going to see a convergence between the drone industry and this handheld PC industry. And once you have a SIM card that you can put into your handheld PC, I don't think many people are going to want to carry a traditional smartphone anymore, just because no one even holds these up to their ears anymore to take calls anyways. It's always through like Bluetooth headsets, it's always through Bluetooth audio in your car. And so I don't think, you know, having a device even this large is really that big of a factor anymore as, you know, it used to be. And then obviously, you know, once you're using a drone as part of your everyday life, then, you know, a screen this size also isn't ideal. So again, we're still fairly far away from building our own handheld PC. We are actually working on our own prototype right now, but by and large, we are focused on the development space, selling our platforms to colleges and high schools. And then I mentioned one of the two most recent customers that we received, one being the R&D company out of Huntsville, Alabama. Our most recent customer found us again through our YouTube videos that we've been posting. They're a company out of Colorado that makes satellite vehicle command and control software, and they wanted to see if they can expand their software to control our drones as well, because if they can control our drones, there's a whole slew of drones that they would also be able to control, kind of getting into the nerdy mumbo jumbo, but using what's called the Mavlink protocol, which is like the open source standard, not just used in the consumer and commercial world, but used across the DoD as well. Which then leads us to our next opportunity that we just had come up, where back in July of last year, the Department of War now put out what's called a sources sought for low-cost, repairable, and modifiable drones, looking to field literally as many of them as they can get their hands on as quickly as they can. And as we talked about, there's really, I mean, there's some up and coming, but there's no American drone manufacturers that can produce at the scale that even just the Army wants as one division of the Department of Defense, let alone the commercial market, let alone the consumer market. And so we're not really focused on the military market, but I look at what we're doing going after the consumer and commercial market, very similar to how Microsoft operates with, or operated and started off with Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word, the most popular product bought across all of the government, not just the Department of Defense. And it's not like it was a product, you know, built specifically for them, right? So I think if we can build the best drone software and best drone hardware for the consumer and commercial market, it's probably going to be best, maybe with some slight modifications for the military as well. And that's already proven to be somewhat the case with our Develop Air platforms, even though they're not super refined, you know, for the everyday person. They're starting to train more and more Army or just Department of Defense groups to not just operate the drones, but actually do their own 3D printing to repair their own parts and do like some more of the technician sort of work. And we actually got a contract with the U.S. Army October of last year, completed it December of last year, working with one of our customers that bought 10 of our Develop Air Mini for them, for the Army to create 10 JROTC teams in this competition that uses our Develop Air Mini as their go-to drone platform. And I say they use our Develop Air Mini right now, which is true, but they're actually very interested in our Develop Air Micro that we're bringing to market here by the end of March, just because our Develop Air Mini technically fits the requirements of this indoor competition that the JROTC divisions are now going to be competing in. But it's like a 10-foot by 10-foot indoor playing area that they operate in. And if you guys have ever tried to operate a drone of this size indoors, definitely doable in a space like this, but if you're also trying to complete a series of challenges with it, it can be fairly cumbersome, right? So that's why we're working on a smaller model, but the Army is actually interested not just in some of these smaller, more compact models, but some of our larger models. But as I just kind of alluded to, being interested in the compact, smaller versions, one of the downsides with this current design is not having folding or collapsible boom arms. So that's actually some R&D that we're ongoing right now. We've tested a couple of designs, not quite yet in flight, just because we think they would be prone to too many vibrations. But that's something that would not just help the Army be able to adopt Develop Air as their go-to low-cost, repairable, modifiable drone platform, but also just from a very real standpoint of we ship these out in like big, like Pelican-style cases that we have, and we have to pass that cost on to the customer, right? So it's not just like the integration of all the components, it's even the packaging that's a big problem with American companies being able to make a prosumer or consumer drone product. And so, you know, the case itself is another $400 that you're adding on to the cost of our drone, and then the shipping, you know, depending on where we're shipping it out, could be another $200, right? And so that's just not very practical for a lot of different organizations, especially, you know, smaller ones with limited budgets. So we are, all that's to say, we are working on vertical integration, but right now with Develop Air, we design exactly one of our electrical components that goes into it. Everything else is off the shelf. And then, you know, as we continue to progress, not just scaling up our manufacturing operation to produce more at scale, also start producing more of the components, which actually with the Develop Air Micro, we're starting to produce our own battery packs. So that was something that James mentioned. We're not like producing the individual battery cells, we're not producing the individual battery cells. You know, that's well beyond what we have the framework or infrastructure here to do. But that's our kind of first step into more kind of advanced manufacturing beyond like the final assembly that we do. And then one of the longer term R&D projects that we've just taken on is building our first batch of our own brushless motors. Again, still buying some of the individual components, but, you know, doing all like the CNCing of like the casing, not ourselves, but with local providers, just to show that, hey, we're not just kind of integrators of, you know, off-the-shelf components. Of course, I think we're already showing that by developing our own software as well. But that's just another way, kind of like the early days of the automotive industry, the ones that weren't able to vertically integrate, bring all of their production pretty much in-house or with a group of tightly knit suppliers, you know, they're not around, you know, 100 years later. So as much as what we're doing is for us to grow iVue as a company, I am very much an American patriot and think we are, putting it nicely, a decade behind China in this sort of drone development and proliferation, but hopefully not a decade too late. And as much as I would love to get into the urban air mobility, as I like to call them, passenger drones, that's a longer term roadmap item for our company. I like to think before even getting to the cargo at the larger scale that, I'm sorry, I forget the company, and Nadine was talking about, I think we need to get people used to the idea of using much smaller drone platforms like this, maybe a little bit larger in their everyday lives before they're more accustomed and more okay with larger drone cargo platforms flying overhead on a regular basis. And then, of course, getting in a passenger drone themselves, where, again, we're a decade behind China. If you have $300,000 burning a hole in your pocket, you can just go buy a passenger drone in China and use that to transport yourself and maybe another passenger with a little bit of cargo across the city that you live in. And that's, to me, a shame that we're not leading the charge there. And so obviously we have some catching up to do ourselves, but more than happy to answer any questions. And like I said, whoever wants to stick around for a flight demo, be more than happy to do so outside as well. So thank you. Great job, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming up here and, you know, showing us your products and everything. And I think the biggest thing is, I'm sitting there listening, and you kind of brought it up, right? These are multi-tools. There's so many different assets that you can use these with.
Exactly.
And it's really above and beyond now. So all I have to say is, you know, I hope we see you for the next Georgia chapters and everything. And I'd love to, you know, stay in touch and see how your company progresses overall, because there's a lot of great ideas and beginnings. You're planting the seeds right now.
Absolutely.
But eventually, who knows, you could have a forest.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll like take over DJI single-handedly, but my goal in the next 10, 15 years is to have about 30% market share.
Perfect.
So.
Well, we look forward to seeing that, and thank you so much for coming out here.
Thank you, guys.